Welcome back to what may be the biggest episode of Carnage House productions so far. I'm very lucky to have with me today Bettina Arndt. How are you going?
I'm great.
Now,
very happy to be here.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that. Bettina has been the subject of a lot of controversy in the media as of late in particular. Although she's been in the media a long time, she's a trained clinical psychologist, a former sex therapist, and an author and social commentator. I've been over the last week reading this book, #mentoo, which Bettina is the author of. And it's been the subject of a lot of debate. One of the chapters, the manufactured rape crisis, is getting a lot of attention, particularly on campuses. And you went to do a speaking tour to talk about the fake rape crisis, called the Fake Rape Crisis Tour. That was met by some resistance and some protests. Why don't you tell us, first of all, what were you hoping to achieve with the Fake Rape Crisis Tour?
I'm wanting to go out on campuses and talk to students about what's going on here. This is a manufactured crisis. There is no rape crisis on our universities. Our universities are very safe places for most young women, which is something we should be celebrating. And it really worries me that the feminists are determined to present our campuses as unsafe for young women. I mean, crazy thing to do. When you think about, we're trying to attract families to send their daughters from Asia to come and study in this country, and yet we're promoting our campuses as unsafe for young women. I mean, what's this all about? And I mean, if you look at what it is all about, it's really sinister, because essentially what's behind the feminist campaign is to try to bully the universities into adjudicating rape cases on campus. And that's something that should worry everybody, and particularly male students, because they're really at risk. We're talking about using lower standards of proof, not giving accused young men their normal legal protection they would have in a criminal law case, making decisions that could have them tossed out of university on the basis of some ad hoc university committee. And this is all because the feminists are unhappy about the fact that we don't get enough rape convictions. You know, if you have two young people dating or whatever who have a hookup, and he says something and she says something else happened, and you put those two in front of a jury, the jury won't usually send that young man to prison for 7 years when they don't know who to believe, when it's very hard to work out where the truth lies. And this makes the feminists really annoyed, so they want more convictions. And that's why they're trying to get this whole shift out of the criminal law system for these cases into our universities. And it's a dire move for our university system and for, you know, the potential young men who are going to get into trouble as a result of that.
Well, it's really interesting. And this book, #mentoo, explores that. And I want to get into that, I think, in the second half of this interview. But firstly, I want to talk about the big protests and the scuffles, as they've been called, or minor incidents that happened, particularly at your University of Sydney speech. Now, the Fake Rape Crisis Tour, was it supposed to start at La Trobe University in Melbourne?
It did start at La Trobe.
Yeah.
And the first thing that happened is La Trobe turned around and banned it.
Yeah.
They announced my talk conflicted with the values of the university, which I thought was pretty funny.
I wonder what the values are.
I know, a bit of a worry, isn't it? And then we used some media pressure, and they backed down. And they allowed me to speak, and that was fine. I mean, there was a protest there, and there were stupid things about it. We had security, all these big burly blokes lined up in the room with me, not doing anything to stop the students outside who were bashing on the doors and making much noise as they possibly could. It all seemed a bit odd to me. I mean, you could have thought the security would keep them away from the venue so we could actually hear. We had real trouble with the Q&A particularly, in that we couldn't hear what was going on. But that was okay. I mean, no problem with the protest.
Yeah.
And then Sydney was another thing altogether.
Yeah, so you got off to a hot start at La Trobe, and then you find yourself at USyd, and at the event, before the event even starts, there's the Women's Collective organised a protest. Now, the Women's Collective, for those who aren't familiar, is spelt WOM. What's that? Asterisk X, right? Because they don't want to have men in the name. So it's WOM *N apostrophe S collective. That's who we're dealing with. So they had a big protest. They formed they were linking up with each other, stopping people from even going in to listen to what you had to say. There's ones with there's a girl with a megaphone yelling that you're like a rape defender. And we'll post the video. We'll splice in the video just so you can see what exactly was going on. But before I get your take on it, I'll read out the quote from Madeline Ward, who's the head of the collective, who also in the wake of the protest wrote articles for The Guardian defending her position. She says that Arndt's ideas on sexual assault are dangerous, and I didn't want victims to be re-traumatised by them. But then this article from the Sydney Morning Herald says that Ward nonetheless wanted to hear what Arndt had to say and even bought tickets to the event. And this is the kicker. But we couldn't go in because Bettina's people got rowdy and the police were called, so we went to the pub instead. Now, that is a blatant lie, and anybody who's watched the video will find this. And then finally, I'll just get another quote from Jacqueline Maley, who wrote for the SMH. She said, on-campus scuffles between the Sydney University Liberal Club and students protesting against her address. What actually happened was the Women's Collective was blocking the entrance to the room where Bettina was going to speak, and the only scuffles that were going on were from people who were trying to walk into the room to hear what you had to say.
Being stopped from getting into the room.
Yeah.
And there were about 40 of them blocking the whole corridor leading into the venue. And by the time all those protesters arrived, I probably had half a dozen of my audience there, but I think we'd had 60-something booked in or 70-something, I don't know. And they were all stuck outside, not able to get through this, group blocking the whole entranceway.
Yeah.
And they were pretty aggro. I mean, they were having a wonderful time chanting abuse at me, but they were also pretty aggressive. I mean, some of the girls got quite distressed. There was a girl on, trying to mark off people who'd bought tickets, and she was being pushed and shoved, and kids had their, backpacks ripped off them, and various people were really upset at the process of trying to get through that group of really aggressive. This was harassment.
Yeah.
This was really bullying behaviour that was going on there.
Yeah. And the riot police were eventually called in, and some of the protesters, including Ward, were forcefully removed, and then you got to speak. Yeah.
And the other thing is they set off the fire alarm, which means they are not allowed to, that event cannot go ahead until the police or someone comes and turns that off.
Yeah.
Timed me still. I was still not speaking half an hour after the event was due to start.
Right.
So there was quite a long period before the riot squad were called in. They moved everyone out. They manually lifted Maddie Ward from the stairs when she was clinging. We've got all of that on video. And only then did the event go ahead.
Yeah. Okay.
I also should say we had these security guards we'd been forced to, or that the Liberal Club had been forced to pay for, and the security guards said to me they couldn't protect us. That's why they called the police. I didn't call the police.
Right.
And so that
seems like that might be in the job description for the security guard.
Well, they were great blokes and they were very nice, but they, big burly blokes, they couldn't. They were pushing these kids.
Well, I'll tell you what, these, I'm sure the Women's Collective girls are, they're a force to be reckoned with, particularly when they have something on their mind.
Yeah.
So let's talk about security and what happens when there are protests that go on to a particular talk. Now, you told me before the interview that some universities have different policies, but according to Michael Spence, the Vice-Chancellor of Sydney University, it's the people who are holding the talks who have to foot the security bill. And some, including myself, may interpret that as an incentive to protest views you don't agree with, so that the security bill is so large and the mental hassle of doing the event is so much that people just will opt out of doing it.
It's all too hard.
Yeah.
Look, it is difficult, and we had this prolonged discussion with Cindy, with Michael Spence about the security fee, and I actually have a crowdfunder. I've had people have donated $6,000 so far to helping me do this campus tour. There's a lot of support for what I'm doing out there, which is very nice. But we knew we were going to be facing fees in some universities, and of course we've printing posters and doing. We've in some cases paid kids to hand out posters because all of that's quite difficult. But Michael Spence said no way. We had to pay for this, whatever it was, $500 and something. And after the event, I wrote to him and said that the security guards had said to us they couldn't do their job. They couldn't, they needed to call in the riot squad or the event wouldn't have gone ahead. How about refunding our money? And he said, no, they did their job. I mean,
it's a bit ridiculous. But when you think about it in more of an international context, I mean, we should remember that in 2017, the University of Berkeley had a couple of speakers who some students did not quite agree with. They had a month in which they hosted a Ben Shapiro talk, which was quite famous, and then also Milo Yiannopoulos' Free Speech Week. And altogether over that month, the bill was just under $4 million for security. Now, if Michael Spence thinks that it's appropriate to put, the actual speakers, for them to foot the bill when it's Antifa running around with bike locks and setting things on fire. I mean, it's no wonder why some people think the universities might have a problem with free speech.
Oh, absolutely. And, the way that, what really bothers me about the Sydney Uni protest is the constant spin the university is putting on the whole subject, misrepresenting what happened, telling everybody there was no problem, the whole thing's been a beat up, it was just delayed, but it went ahead, forgetting to mention that the taxpayers paid for those riot squad to come in, it's really annoying. I don't see why this Vice Chancellor who gets paid $1.5 million a year needs to lie about what happened. That's just extraordinary to me.
Well, so the results from the altercation was kind of two investigations, one internal from the University of Sydney and another government free speech investigation. Now, the University of Sydney had a 9-month investigation which resulted in disciplinary action against Madeline Ward. Which is a real first. I mean, Maddie Ward has been in trouble for all sorts of things. Last year, there was an altercation with an anti-abortion group on campus, and she flashed her tits at them, and they put in a complaint to the university because she's also really harassing them, being very aggro to them. And apparently, the university investigation unit determined that she should be given a semester's misconduct, suspension. Right. And the university didn't act. That's apparently the story. I'm not too sure of the details there. So I think this was a first. In fact, I put in a complaint about the key organisers. I sent them hours and hours, and we had fabulous video footage of everything that went on. We had like 20 witnesses who'd been there, and they did this long investigation. And I was asking the university to take action under the bullying and harassment regulations. And of course, Maddie Ward now says I weaponised the bullying and harassment laws against them, which of course in a sense I did, but that of course it's the authoritarian left that insisted on those sort of regulations being introduced into universities to, we have to regulate everyone's behaviour. And now they object to the fact that the university found that they had breached. I mean, there were no question these women were, all the protesters were harassing my audience, bullying my audience and bullying me as a member of the public. And I think it's a real breakthrough that we actually achieved, forced the university to take some action. Okay, well, it sounds like a big win for
big
Bettina
win.
Arndt.
You wouldn't know it, of course, if you looked at the media coverage of this.
Well, we did a podcast a couple of weeks ago where we talked about all the student protesters in Hong Kong who are fighting against the extradition bill to mainland China. And it just seems to me like Australia has got the worst student protesters around. Like, you get these brave ones who are fighting for something really good, and then you get the protesters at Bettina Arndt's event, where Bettina's trying to say that the campuses might be more safe than what the mainstream narrative is supposed to be, which should be something to celebrate or at least discuss. And you get nobody's allowed to hear what you have to say.
I mean, think about that. Why are they trying to stop me? That's what I think is really interesting. Everybody knows there's no rape crisis. We have never had more young women lining up to go to university. We've got, 60% of graduates are female. Would all these families be sending their daughters to our universities if anyone remotely believed we have a major rape problem?
Okay.
You know.
Well, let's get into it a bit then. Let's get into, do we have a campus rape problem? Now, there was a website I was looking at today. It's called women.com.au. It's spelled WHIMN, I guess because they also don't have the word men in the woman spelling. They said of the 31,000 students at 39 Australian universities surveyed by the Australian Human Rights Commission, 1.6% had been sexually assaulted in a university setting, compared to just 0.092 of the average university population. This means that young women at universities are 17 times more likely to be raped than those in the general population.
That's actually totally wrong. It's 1.6% over 2 years, so that's 0.8% over 1 year. I've got the figures from the New South Wales Bureau of Crime Statistics. It shows universities are 100 times safer than the general population when it comes to
there is a
young women
point from
and
your book. I think this one might be an American statistic, but it says that young women who don't attend college are victims of sexual violence at a rate about 30% greater than their more educated counterparts.
That's an American figure, yeah. Surveys everywhere. Or when you have proper data, it shows universities are very safe places compared to, Indigenous communities, compared to places we know where young women are really at risk. And if you talk to people in the general community, everyone would say, yes, of course that's true. We'd hope that's true. We're dealing with educated young men here. If they aren't treating women with respect, well, our whole education system has really fallen down, hasn't it? The notion that, anyway, so I think it's pretty obvious that that's a blatant lie. And what was fascinating about that Human Rights Commission, they spent $1 million on that survey, surveying people across Australia. Clearly you would expect people who have some experience with this. Of course we're dealing with a very serious problem here. Any rape is one too many. I'm not denying the importance of that issue. But what I'm saying is it would be most unusual if that sort of survey didn't attract people who had some experience with this problem and want to talk about it. So to say, the people who'd been raped didn't answer the survey doesn't really make much sense. And we got this really low incidence of rape. 99.2% of women on our campuses have had no experience with sexual assault. That definition included a bloke feeling you up on the train to uni. It didn't just include what happens at the uni. It included public transport. It included things like being tricked into sex against your will. It was the broadest possible definition to try to get the highest statistic they could, and they got 0.8%. Now I was the only journalist in Australia to write an article saying we should be celebrating our safe universities. And the rest of the mainstream media fell into line with the feminist narrative of saying, oh no, we've still got this huge problem of sexual violence at our universities, and they conflated sexual harassment with rape. And they deliberately disguised the statistics. And of course, if you look at what the harassment really is, it's mainly unwanted staring.
Right.
We have a big problem with unwanted staring at our universities, but I don't think that's a huge cause for an alarm.
Right. Okay.
Maybe if women wore a few more clothes, they wouldn't get as much unwanted staring.
Right. Okay. Why do you think?
That would be a Muslim solution to this problem, wouldn't it?
Right.
Bit of a burqa. Huh?
Yeah. Well, I assume that would. You wouldn't get a lot of stares. You wouldn't get a lot of people checking you out if you're in a burqa.
There you go.
Well, what do you think is the kind of reason why? Why would the kind of feminist narrative be motivated to manipulate the statistics or fudge them or want that number inflated? What do you think the reason for that might be?
Look, we've seen this all play out in America, and that's what's fascinating about this whole debate. Obama, whatever it was, 10 years ago, say, almost a decade ago, required all publicly funded universities to adjudicate rape on campus.
Is that Title IX? Is that what it's called?
Under the Title IX anti-discrimination legislation. So he wrote to all the universities and said they would, lose funding if they didn't move in this direction. to adjudicate rape using tribunals, using a lower standard of proof where men weren't offered normal legal protection and so on. And it's been a total disaster for the higher education sector in America. There's been, fairly recently, the universities lost their 100th case where the male student who'd been accused and his family sued the university and won for failure to protect his legal rights, where he wasn't offered, the proper legal hearing. He wasn't, given full access to the details of the accusation. A whole range of things that must be done under criminal law didn't apply in this American tribunal system. And as a result of that, the Trump administration is now moving back, and they have announced a whole lot of changes, which are all about ensuring due process rights for young men, for wrongly accused young men on campus. So it's all played out in America. We saw exactly the same thing. We saw the fake statistics. We saw this attempt to present a rape scare campaign on university campuses. And we saw the university being bullied into taking over adjudication of rape. And we saw it turning out to be a disaster. Now, what the hell? How can our vice chancellors, who presumably are trotting off to international conferences all the time and hobnobbing with the presidents of the American colleges, do you think they really don't know what happened there? I mean, they are such lily-livered wusses, the men running, mainly men, some women, running our universities, that they haven't got the guts to say to this tiny group of feminists, we're not going there. We know what happens if we go down this road. We will get our pants sued off us in 10 years' time. But no, they're all kowtowing to this feminist narrative. They're all the day after the Human Rights Commission survey was released, every vice chancellor in the country was out there strutting away, pretending there's a rape crisis, saying, we've got a terrible problem of sexual violence, and we're going to introduce 24-hour rape crisis lines and sexual consent courses, and all this rubbish. I wrote to every vice chancellor in Australia asking why they were lying about the safety of our campuses. And I got all these weasel words from the media units of the universities, saying nothing. I mean, no one would say why they were choosing to misrepresent this important issue. And it's all because of this lobby group, this tiny lobby group who's bullying the universities into shifting in this direction. Anyway, as I say, I just think it's really dangerous what's happening here, and someone has to speak out about it.
Yeah, well, in your book, you quote Christina Hoff Sommers, who goes by the name The Factual Feminist. Might be your American counterpart.
Oh, well, that's very flattering. She's a very well-known professor, but anyway. And
she talks about when it comes to sex, that men, that we've kind of flipped the innocent until proven guilty on its head, and that men are now guilty until proven innocent. And it kind of, it might relate a little bit to like the Me Too movement, in the sense that you have slogans coming out like "Believe the woman all the time" kind of thing. Do you feel like that's happening in Australia?
Oh, it's no question it's happening. I make YouTube videos, and I've already made 2 videos with male students who've been pursued by university committees. One of them was in Adelaide. A PhD student contacted me and he said, I've had this letter from a university committee saying I've been accused of rape. What do I do? And I found a criminal barrister to represent him pro bono, which was nice. And so we had 8 months warding off this committee, where the lawyer would tell him what to say, and they'd say, you have to appear at this meeting tomorrow, and he would write back and say, there's no obligation for me to do that. But it was really scary. That committee had the right to withhold this guy's PhD. So really serious consequences for him. And if people want to watch it, they can watch my YouTube video with him, which shows, because we ended up, it all came down to he had all the social media evidence saying the accusations didn't stand up, and a whole range of issues came involved. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, well, there's an interesting point in your book where you talk about things like text messages before and after the event aren't allowed to be included in any of the cases or discussions, even when the girl has sent text messages saying like, that was really fun last night,
Yeah.
can't wait to see
Well,
you again.
we had some of that evidence in that particular case, but I mean that is one of the big feminist pushes to try to say social media evidence can't be used in rape cases because that's usually what gets the accused let off.
Right.
You know, did you know about the Columbia mattress girl?
I just read that chapter.
I think we have to tell people about this.
Yeah, tell them the story.
Famous case. If you Google Columbia mattress girl,
Well, get Bettina's book, #mentoo, and read the chapter.
read the chapter. Okay, Columbia mattress girl is about a girl who protested the fact that she felt Columbia University had not properly investigated her rape allegation. She'd accused a fellow student of anally raping and tried to strangle her, but it was exactly that sort of case. I think 2 days after that alleged event, there was a message from her to him saying she wanted to come to a party in his room. A month later, she's texting him or messaging him saying, you know, where are you, Paul? I love you. All these really positive messages. And the university investigated and decided it didn't hold up the idea that she was a rape victim. She objected to the decision made by Columbia and for years carried her mattress around with her at the university. I just
was even allowed to
get
take
very
it
croaky.
well, in the book you talk about she was even allowed to take it to her graduation ceremony. She was she was allowed to, I think, use it in her her visual arts course, because
she was given credit as performance art towards her visual arts major. And in the end, the guy who was accused and his family sued Columbia, and they were forced to make a big payout, apparently, and to apologise for failing to protect this guy's legal rights. And the funniest thing is, like 2 weeks after that decision went through, was the night that the day that the Human Rights Commission data was released here. And we had protests at Parliament House in Canberra, and they were all carrying their mattresses,
right. Yeah.
which I thought was really funny. And this case had just gone down in
Yeah.
Columbia.
Yeah. Okay. So what would your advice be to universities on this issue? What type of policies should they be looking at, or should they just leave it up to the police?
Look, I think there's a big difference. What we're seeing is this deliberate fudging of sexual harassment and sexual assault, and they're deliberately downplaying the figures, showing that there's very little sexual assault, very little rape, thank goodness, but there's comparatively high levels of low-grade harassment. And I don't see any problems if universities want to get involved in that territory. If they want to set up sexual consent courses, which they are, there's real problems with what they're teaching in those sexual consent courses, but I don't think it's a bad thing to educate people about this, to talk about, when is a woman likely to take offence at the way a guy looks at her or what a guy says to her, whatever it is. That's fine. That's part of, I suppose, supervising lots of young males and females who are interacting and making sure they all behave decently towards each other. But rape is a criminal offence for a very good reason. It's a really serious crime, which could mean the accused person could end up in prison for years and years and years. We treat it seriously, and the universities have no business floundering around in rape cases, because not only are they risking someone who's falsely accused not getting a fair hearing, but they risk a genuine rape victim not interfering with the chances of her getting the conviction she wants. These people have no qualifications in investigating a rape case. It's a job for the police, and our police system now is bending over backwards to believe the victim. I mean, if you talk to people I know in the DPP, public prosecutors, who will say they don't dare, they push all rape cases through to trial just about these days, because they know the pressure is on them to always believe the victim, to take all these cases very seriously. They bend over backwards there were real problems with rape victims being traumatised by the process, and I think they're trying very hard to ensure alleged victims, get dealt with in the most sympathetic, supportive way possible. But it's still a really serious crime that needs to be treated within the criminal law system.
Okay, so before we take it back to the kind of the free speech issue, this is kind of what you talk about on the Fake Rape Crisis tour.
Yeah.
Is this what people could expect if you come to a university and they come to hear you speak?
Yeah. I mean, I talk about the statistics and I talk about some of these cases. I've got a half a dozen other cases of people, young males being accused all around Australia. And I talk about some of those experiences that are happening, that are happening to them, and how appallingly badly the universities are treating them. And I think people need to know about that. But I also want part of what I do always is a Q&A. If people object to what I'm saying or have questions to ask me, I'm very happy to engage with them. This is not just about me telling them what to think. It's saying, what is going on here? If you have queries about what's going on here, come and talk to me about it. Let's have a discussion around this.
Well, that's great to hear. We're going to try our absolute best to get Bettina back onto the University of Sydney. We've had, a little bit, it's going to be a bit tricky, but you best believe we're going to get there eventually.
But it's ridiculous. The university has been forced to acknowledge that there's been a problem. You would have thought the university would be delighted to have me back again.
Yeah.
To prove their free speech credentials,
Well, you would hope so.
We would hope so.
Well, leave a comment down below and let us know what you think, how we can get Bettina back, and if you'd like to see her speak, which I'm sure you would. I mean, why wouldn't you? And now, so I want to take us back. We mixed it up in a bit of order, but I was happy to because that was a really interesting discussion about the statistics around rape on campus. So we talked a little bit about the security, and we finished up on the internal investigation at University of Sydney. But one of the other implications following that was a government review, a government investigation. And so the Minister for Education, Dan Tehan, decided to launch an independent review into freedom of speech on Australian campuses, which was led by the former Chief Justice Robert French. Now, Robert French concluded that claims of a freedom of speech crisis on Australian campuses are not substantiated. He recommended a model code, blah, 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 and a few other things. One of the other interesting things he did say, though, was that there was no duty to protect staff or students from feeling offended or shocked or insulted by the lawful speech of another. Now, whether or not there is a free speech crisis on the campus is a claim we can investigate and which we will proceed to do. Now,
the critical word is crisis. And I think he's probably right to say that there's no crisis, but there is an issue.
Yeah.
And as his words made clear, if you read the whole document, he's saying there are real issues that the university need to address here.
Right.
But of course, that's not how the media spun this decision.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about 3 examples. Now, the first one will be Cassie J, who's the filmmaker who made The Red Pill, which came to Australia, caused a lot of controversy, and who you had a big role in touring around Australia and facilitating that. We can talk a little bit about the marine physicist Peter Ridd from the James Cook University, and then also the Ramsay Centre for Western Civilization, who have all been from a, let's say, non-social justice perspective, who have had a lot of trouble voicing their opinions on university campuses. But you are the Cassie J expert, you are the Red Pill documentary expert. Why don't you tell us what exactly happened with that? Yeah,
Cassie J is a young Californian filmmaker who had wonderful feminist credentials. She'd always been a feminist. She made lots of movies that, where she received great acclaim from her feminist community. And then she decided she originally decided to look at the rape crisis, funnily enough, and went in, researching a documentary on that, and ended up talking to some of the men's rights groups. And much to her surprise, she realised they were talking about genuine. She thought they were going to be a bunch of misogynist rat bags and violent, horrible men. And she found what they were telling her about what's happening to men really surprised her. She made this documentary about her own journey, if you like, through this process of being a feminist, thinking they were going to be really ghastly men, listening to what they had to say, and being forced to rethink her views about men's rights. And So it's actually quite a powerful movie, talking about a whole range of issues impacting on men. I mean, why is it that 6 out of 8 of the people killing themselves every day in Australia, for instance, are male, with the huge soaring male suicide rates, the allegations of domestic violence, and any number of issues where we're seeing laws, rules and regulations tilted against men in favour of women now. And so it's a movie about a feminist being red-pilled, learning the truth about what's happening to men and women in our society. And I mean, it's a very good movie, very easy to, I think, confronting for some people. But anyway, so she produces this movie. It was released in Australia in 2016. We were the first country in the world to try to ban this movie. And the sort of irony, she's making a movie really about how shocked she was that feminists were shutting down debate on any number of men's issues. And what did the Australian feminists do? They tried to shut it down, and they succeeded. The first screening in Melbourne was closed down. They bullied Palace Cinemas into, even though they'd sold the whole cinema full, they decided it wasn't going ahead. And I decided to get involved and we organised screenings around Australia with Cassie. And then Cassie came here for an international men's conference, which was terribly embarrassing because I was trying to look after her, and our media tore her apart. The Australian media was just appalling. I mean, why our mainstream media think they have to represent the feminist narrative? It's just beyond me. Every survey that's ever been done shows there's a tiny minority of women and men and women, but of women in Australia who call themselves feminists. They're always less than 20%. So why in the hell do they think they have to represent that 20% when they're doing interviews with a a person who has this really interesting story to tell?
Well, I think the next person on our list might give some light to it, because if you deviate from that narrative, you're quite likely to lose your job. As far as I can tell. Now, marine physicist Peter Ridd was sacked by James Cook University in 2018 for allegedly breaching the university's code of conduct. What he said was that scientific organisations like the Australian Institute of Marine Science and the ARC Centre for Coral and Reef Studies, can no longer be trusted, right? So he got sacked for that, for disrespect to his colleagues and for breaching the code of conduct. Now, Judge Salvatore Vasta ruled in the Federal Court of Australia that, first of all, the sacking was unlawful, and second of all, that James Cook University, quote, had not understood the whole concept of intellectual freedom, right?
Yeah.
So you have somebody questioning the narrative, the climate change narrative, which I myself do not know about. There's some people who I know who are very, they say climate change for sure. Other people are huge skeptics, I know. At the end of the day, I don't know, but you have a guy who has some evidence. He's a marine physicist. He's teaching at a university, and him disagreeing with the mainstream narrative is not allowed.
That's right.
That might shed some light on why people aren't, are very scared to go against the grain.
Yeah, and I get letters from academics around Australia in a whole range of disciplines who say they don't dare voice controversial opinions anymore. I mean, there's a whole range of areas where discussion has been shut down. And it's just appalling. I mean, my father was an eminent academic, and he would be so horrified at what's happening to our universities.
Right. Well, the final one we'll briefly mention is the Ramsay Centre for Western Civilization, who wanted to set up at some Australian universities an undergraduate course in Western civilization. Recently, the Wollongong University has approved it, and it started enrolling for 2020 in the course, but there's been huge protests. There's a big legal process within the University of Wollongong. There was a lot of interest from universities like the ANU and University of Sydney, but was met with such resistance by academics that...
But a tiny group, the unions, the academic unions, the thugs in our universities are controlling debate over that sort of issue as well. And I'm sure I suspect if we could give a really careful anonymous survey of all academics, most academics would object to that, because they know perfectly well they're teaching Islamic studies, they're teaching all sorts of alternate views of the world, and the notion that we could close down the Western civilization, which is the base of our whole culture.
Yeah.
We're not allowed to teach that. It's just obscene.
I mean, I'm about to go to China for a month through the Department of Chinese Studies.
Yeah, that's
but
right.
we're not allowed a Department of Western Civilization Studies.
I know.
It's a bit ridiculous. But also, it's because, like, I think Peterson talks about this a lot, that people think that, like, the Western civilization just has a foundation in racism and colonialism and sexism and all this stuff, but it just doesn't really stand up to common sense. I mean, we have a lot of great stuff here in Australia and in all the Western countries. We have a lot of great stuff, but that's a conversation for another day, I think. I think at the bottom line, we must understand that there's a group of people in universities who do not even want to listen to other opinions. They weren't there to say Western civilization is the best thing of all time and shut down every other, discipline, right? If you go and do any arts course in a university, you'll get a whole lot of,
Claptrap. Ideological claptrap, I would say.
Yeah, you get a lot of critical theory. You get a lot of like
Postmodernism,
postmodernism,
rubbish.
Post-structuralism.
Yeah.
You'll know the Frankfurt School quite well, and you'll know Foucault quite well, but you might not know the founding fathers very well. And you'll be able to criticise stuff really well, but you won't be able to appreciate what's being built. And I think an important thing is to recognise that it's of course not perfect, and there's always things to improve. But the way you improve things is actually through discussion, not through having one singular viewpoint.
And it's an absolute disgrace that our universities, which is supposed to be about promoting intellectual discussion and free exchange of ideas, are being closed down by these lunatic, maddy, ideological... I can't even begin to describe the anger I feel about what's happening here.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, so what we might think is that Robert French might have been right, that there might not be a crisis, but it sure as hell looks like there could be one if it goes unchecked.
Well, I think there's a problem. There is a problem, and most people, many students would acknowledge that, many academics would acknowledge it, and it's a crying shame that the majority, the quiet Australians of students and academics are too nervous to speak out about what's going on here.
Definitely. And I think there's a lot of people out there, including me, who feel like there's a lot of things we really haven't made up our mind about. But the way you make up your mind about something is by hearing both sides and then making a decision. And if you can't hear both sides, you can't make a good decision.
Yeah.
And we have to do, I think, whatever we can to try and protect the right for both sides to say, to have their 2 cents and say their input.
Yeah. Well, I'm very happy to debate the other side, but to me it's like taking on an anti-vaxxer. I mean, there's the truth and there's the ideologues.
Right.
But if the ideologues want to debate me, I'm happy to have a go.
Okay, well that sounds great. I can't recommend enough Bettina's book, #mentoo. If you haven't realised, it's a play on words of the #MeToo movement. Deals with a lot of stuff. You might be very surprised at some of the stuff you find in there, but it's a very good read, an easy read, but also very informative.
Good.
So we'll put a link to that in the description if you feel like picking that up. We'll hopefully get Bettina back in to speak at university.
Well, you did say we'd talk a little bit about sex at some point. So.
Well, I would love to do a podcast about sex. I think that would be interesting. And Bettina, as a former sex therapist, and as one of Australia's first.
I was one of the first sex therapists. And
Well,
I spent the first 10 years of my life teaching in universities, teaching doctors and medical students about sex. So,
Really?
yeah.
Well, I'm sure we could have a great podcast about it. And I think there'd be a lot of people really interested to hear. I'd be very interested to see the changes from when you started to where you feel like we are today.
Yeah. No, I have some very interesting observations about. I mean, it's all bad news for you young men, unfortunately. But I can tell you about that.
Okay, fantastic. Well, look forward to that for another episode. Where can people find you? Where can people, if they want to check in with you, see what you're saying, where can people find you?
I have a website which is in a state of chaos at the moment, but it's still we're just getting that back up together. But they can contact me through there, Facebook, Twitter.
Big YouTube channel as well.
YouTube channel.
If you want to really see what she has to say, yeah, a lot of videos on there.
Long video with Jordan Peterson, with Milo, with various other people.
Saw that, fantastic. Anyway, let us know what you think. Let us know if you agree or disagree. Because you know what, this is a platform for free speech. So Thank you for
Good.
being with us, Bettina. I've had a great time.
Good,
I'd love
nice
to have
to
you on
meet you.
again. And that's it from us today. Thanks for being with us.